Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. We're going to get started with our presentation. We'd like to welcome you to this initial public meeting on the Greenwash Watershed Plan and Environmental Assessment. Our schedule for this evening, right now at 5 p.m., we're going to have a presentation and overview of the project for about 30 minutes, followed by a question and answer session for 30 minutes, and then we will repeat this process at 6 p.m. We will be recording this presentation, and this recording will be available for viewing and posted after this presentation. Written questions will be answered during the meeting or in a follow-up email after the meeting. The platform we're using for tonight's virtual public meeting is GoToWebinar. What you should see on your computer screen is a control panel. And you can open this control panel by clicking on the orange arrow icon. We ask that you please mute your phones by pressing the red microphone button. And in order to communicate with us, we appreciate if you ask a question by typing it in the box. And you'll do that by clicking the drop-down arrow on the questions bar and typing your question in the text box. And we will answer all questions at the end of the presentation. I'd like to introduce our study team to you. Pinal County is the local sponsoring organization for this watershed plan, and Chris Wanamaker, the assistant county engineer, is on the presentation tonight. This plan is also being sponsored by the National Resources Conservation Service, who is our lead federal agency. We have 3 representatives from NRCS with us tonight. We have Emilio Carrillo, Tom Reese, and Nathan Rodriguez. And consultants working with Pinal County and NRCS include myself. I'm Linda Potter, representing the engineering team. We also have Laura Zuzak, representing our environmental team tonight. We do have some goals for this meeting. We'd like to share a project overview, including the schedule, with all of you. We want to obtain input during this scoping period, which is defined from January 4th until mid-February of 2021. We want to ask for your input on watershed issues and resource concerns, including effects of flooding, potentially groundwater depletion, important natural or community resources to be considered, questions about the project effects on the built and natural environment, and other goals that the project should consider. And we want to encourage your involvement throughout the project. We have several ways for you to stay informed as this project progresses. The first is that we have a project information website, which is shown on the link on the screen above. You can also visit the Pinal County website. The address is also shown on the screen. And you can sign up for news or updates by adding your name and email to the question box, or you can submit it via the project website or comment form. Note that all of these links will be shown to you several times during this presentation, so if you don't get them all written down right now, we will give them to you again. As I previously mentioned, the meeting will be recorded and posted to the county's YouTube page, as well as the sites listed above. Please give us some time. It'll take us about 2 weeks from this meeting to get this information posted. There are several ways for you to submit comments during the project and its process. So comments submitted during the scoping phase, as I mentioned, we're defining that through mid-February. These will be used in the development of the draft plan. Additionally, you'll have another opportunity to review the plan and environmental assessment and provide additional input before everything is finalized. We've also set up an electronic version for you to submit your comments, feedback, questions, and you can even submit photos of problem areas at any time via the link to the survey. Comments may also be emailed to christopher.wanamaker@pinal.gov or mailed to him at the address shown below. A printable comment form from the project website may also be emailed to Chris or mailed to the address below. You can download the form on the link. That's also the same link for the project page. There are some key aspects of our plan and environmental assessment process. We'd like to obtain public, agency, and stakeholder input, especially during this initial period. We'd like to develop purpose and need statements, create a watershed study, and also formulate alternatives to mitigate problems that we discover. We want to identify and consider environmental impacts and evaluate benefits and costs of mitigation alternatives, including the future without the project condition, meaning if no alternatives are built, what will be the impacts to the watershed? We want to incorporate mitigation as needed, select a preferred alternative, and once this is complete, the plan and environmental assessment provides a pathway for federal dollars to fund design and construction of preferred solution projects. Another aspect of this process is that it's overseen by the county and NRCS. We have consultation with tribes and all participating federal agencies. We'll have other stakeholder coordination, which include local and state agencies, and we will develop a watershed plan environmental assessment following the NRCS format. Preliminary versions will be reviewed by the county agencies and NRCS, and then we'll produce two documents, a draft and a final, that will be available for public comment. A decision document will be issued by NRCS at the end regarding the project. Next up, I'm going to introduce to you Chris Wanamaker, and he is going to talk about some specifics of the watershed.
Thank you, Linda, for that introduction. As she mentioned, my name is Chris Wanamaker, and I'm the Assistant County Engineer for Pinal County and the public point of contact on this project. On this slide, the boundary of the Greenwash watershed is shown in red. The watershed is roughly 245,000 acres, which is approximately 383 square miles in size, and includes the unincorporated communities of Arizona City, Choo Choo, Silver Bell, as well as portions of Eloy and the Casa Grande in the northern areas. The upper portion of the watershed on the south side is within Pima County. The watershed encompasses portions of the Ironwood National Forest on the southeast, the Silver Bell Mountains on the south, and the Sawtooth Mountain Range on the west. The land cover in the watershed is predominantly natural desert, mountains, and open rangeland, which encompasses approximately 197,000 acres, or 80% of the watershed. Agricultural uses cover 19% of the watershed, and the remaining 1% is developed land. Next slide, please. Thank you. Within the watershed, from a hydrologic perspective, the predominant feature is the Greenwash. Greenwash begins on the east side of the watershed as a branch that splits off from the Santa Cruz River. Water from this split flows westerly and is fairly contained in a man-made structure called the Greene Canal. After about 6 miles, the flows begin to break out and start flooding the open agricultural fields that are located centrally within the watershed. Some of the flow remains in the canal and passes under a large bridge located at Sunland Gin Road. This location is also known as Greene Reservoir, and anyone who's been out there will have likely seen the large levee-like structures in the area. After passing through this area, the floodplain starts to converge around the northern foothills of the Sawtooth Mountains. Flows continue northwest, passing over tribal land before being split at the Santa Rosa Canal. Flows from the Santa Cruz River, as well as other tributaries, combine with the Greenwash at this location as well. From here, the flows pass under Interstate 10 and eventually leave the watershed before combining with the Santa Rosa Wash just before reaching the city of Maricopa. Next slide, please. So some history in the watershed. In 1910, Colonel William Greene and his associates constructed the Greene Canal as a means to divert flows from the Santa Cruz River, which at the time was a perennial stream, to the Greene Reservoir, a topographically low spot at the base of the Sawtooth Mountains. However, after the first major flood in the area, the canal system was breached and it was never repaired. In 1967, the Greene Reservoir Flood Control District constructed improvements in the area, which further diverted flows westerly away from the Santa Cruz River. Subsequently, in 1969 and 1970, the Midway Flood Control District improved existing dikes and constructed new dikes along Greenwash and its tributaries in the northern portion of the watershed. The total length of these improvements was about 12 miles. However, most of these improvements have been damaged or destroyed by floods since their original construction. Next slide, please. Flooding is the primary concern that this watershed intends to address. The watershed has a history of significant flood events, with the earliest recorded floods occurring in 1887. The most notable floods in the Greene watershed include the 1914/1915 flood, as well as the 1983, 93, and 2006 flood events. It has been noted by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers that the severity of floods and their characteristics have changed significantly over time. While most floods have occurred as part of the winter storm cycle, much flooding in the watershed also has been due to localized, smaller-scale, high-intensity monsoon storm events. This is especially the case within the community of Arizona City. Next slide, please. Due to the lack of drainage planning and infrastructure, Arizona City has been subject to more than 22 flooding events since 1887. Historically speaking, the area of Arizona City is known as Santa Cruz Flats. Prior to the 1910 construction of the Greene Canal and its subsequent diversions and improvements, the area would have likely seen much more frequent flooding than it does today. In fact, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, in its 1994 Lower Santa Cruz River feasibility study, noted that most of the floodwater from the 1983 flood event flowed westerly along Greene Canal instead of northerly in its historic path along the Santa Cruz River. Arizona City was originally platted in the 1960s. This was completed prior to many of the regulations that exist today that would have required drainage planning and infrastructure designed to accommodate flooding. For these reasons, in addition to significant land subsidence in the area, flooding is still an all too common problem for this community. It must be noted that Arizona City is still a developing and growing community. In fact, Pinal County issued nearly 300 building permits for new homes just last year. This is a record number of permits issued for Arizona City. And with the commencement of large employment centers within 10 miles of this community, such as the new Nikola Motors and Lucid Motors manufacturing facilities, this positive trend for Arizona City is expected to continue. With regard to flooding, new homes are being required to be elevated. However, this does not address the flooding problems for existing residents. Over the last 10 years, Pinal County Flood Control District has invested several $1 million in planning and construction of drainage improvements in and around Arizona City. The most notable improvement is the Battaglia Basin, which is a 40-acre detention basin located at the southeast corner of Battaglia Road and Hennis Road. This structure serves as a regional outfall point for the area's local runoff and will form the outlet works of future channels to be built in the area. The Greene Watershed Plan will take another look at the flooding situation in Arizona City from a regional perspective. In particular, the plan will seek to find medium to large scale drainage solutions that will protect the community from flooding as a whole. Since Arizona City lacks any appreciable drainage infrastructure, a complete solution to flooding will require both the continuation of localized solutions as well as the addition of regional solutions. Next slide, please. Access and mobility is a secondary concern within the watershed. As noted previously, approximately 99% of the watershed is rural and the roadways reflect this character. With few exceptions, most roadways lack the necessary infrastructure, such as culverts and bridges, to adequately provide all-weather access for drivers and road users. Communities such as Silver Bell can get cut off from services during and after a flood event. After a flood in 2014, residents in this community were unable to go to work or shop for groceries for approximately 3 days. This 2014 flood was a federally declared disaster. However, access for Silver Bell has been cut off many times prior to the 2014 flood event. The Pinal County Flood Control District is working with the Federal Emergency Management Agency on this specific issue. However, other residents within the watershed face similar circumstances after flooding. The Greene Watershed Plan will look to solve access-related problems as a secondary goal for consideration to any flood control infrastructure solution that is proposed in the area. Next slide, please. A third major concern in the watershed is soil erosion. With flooding, you generally have significant amounts of erosion and sediment transport occurring during each event. Not only does this increase the maintenance needs of area roadways, it also contributes to dust control problems. Poor air quality due to dust can contribute to respiratory health problems for people living and working in the area. In addition, dust poses a significant problem for drivers on area roadways, especially Interstate 10 and its major connections. Furthermore, it's been noted that soil erosion is one of the primary factors in why past efforts to control the flooding problems in the watershed have failed. The photo on the right side of this slide shows a man-made structure that failed due to erosion caused by either overtopping or seepage. Portions of the Greene Reservoir Flood Control District's embankment, situated along Sunlingen Road in the southern part of the watershed, have also failed for similar reasons. The Green Watershed Plan will seek to find solutions to mitigate soil erosion problems as a function of any proposed flood control solution proposed in the area. Next slide, please. The fourth and final watershed concern that I will discuss today is the problem of groundwater overuse. The overpumping and use of groundwater in the area, primarily for agricultural purposes, has directly contributed to the increasing problem of land subsidence and earth fissures. According to satellite data obtained from the Arizona Department of Water Resources, as much as 45% of the watershed has experienced a measurable amount of land subsidence since 2002. Significant portions of the watershed have experienced more than 10 feet of subsidence since the first benchmark surveys were completed in 1922. Some portions of Arizona City have subsided as much as 1 to 3 feet in the same period. According to the data, one area near the Greene Canal has subsided more than 15 feet in the past 100 years. There's no doubt that land subsidence has contributed to the flooding problems in the watershed, especially Arizona City. With land subsidence also comes another geologic phenomenon called earth fissures. Earth fissures appear as open cracks on the ground surface. An example of an earth fissure is shown on the slide. The Arizona Geological Survey has documented more than 29 miles of earth fissures within the watershed. Most of the fissure activity has been documented to occur around the base of the Sawtooth Mountains within the Greene Reservoir area and about 1 to 2 miles west of Arizona City. Earth fissures pose a unique hazard to utility infrastructure, roadways, buildings, and such activities as cattle grazing, ranching, and horseback riding, for example. This plan will evaluate the occurrence of land subsidence and fissures due primarily to groundwater overuse as a secondary concern within the watershed. These items may impact both the type and location of any flood mitigation measures that are considered. With that, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Laura Zuzak, who will discuss more about the watershed planning process. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. And thank you to everyone for attending. As Chris and Linda have described, there's been a lot of research and work already done in the watershed, and this effort is intended to carry it forward and to address a specific purpose and need that has been established as a part of this scoping effort. So we really appreciate your input and your continued input throughout this process. The development of the watershed plan and the environmental assessment are very programmatic in nature. They're very procedural, and we're interested in establishing not only a purpose and need statement, but also collecting information so that we can develop alternatives that satisfy that purpose and need statement and are therefore valid to carry forward for further analysis. As Chris has discussed, there are a lot of challenges in the watershed, and obviously flooding is a very serious concern. One of the preliminary purposes that we've discussed as a part of the planning process is increasing flood prevention, or essentially reducing flood damages. Those can include damages to critical infrastructure, residential and commercial property, also irrigation canals and the effects of soil and erosion on those infrastructure and perhaps damages associated with the sediment. Also, we're very interested in maintaining access or mobility, so improving public safety as a part of that flood prevention is key. In order to obtain federal funding, the resulting study needs to meet several grant objectives that are established by the NRCS. It must reflect national priorities. It must also encourage economic development and protect the environment. We believe that incorporating viable groundwater recharge opportunities within the flood prevention solutions will encourage economic development, environmental protection, and also protect infrastructure. And we welcome your input on this as a part of the questions that are available during this call, but also as part of the website. Thank you. Next slide. There are a variety of resources within the human or built environment and also the natural environment that we'll be studying further. These include, but are not limited to, floodplains, including their beneficial ecological effects, also waters of the U.S., streams and wetlands, cultural and tribal resources, farmlands, soils and geology, also infrastructure, which can include transportation and also other utilities. We're also very interested in environmental justice and any socioeconomic considerations. And we'll also be looking at land use compatibility and also perhaps federal lands that are located within the study area, which is the watershed, and how the project might affect those. We'll also be looking at federally protected species and evaluating effects associated with either construction or operations of the facilities that are carried forward for further analysis. And so each of the alternatives will consider a myriad of resources and provide an overview of those potential effects. Next slide, please. Your input is extremely important as a part of this process. That's one of the reasons the National Environmental Policy Act was established. It was intended to encourage public involvement and also ensure that agencies coordinated between each other to make systematic and holistic decisions. So we're obviously very interested in input that you can give us with regard to flooding or depleted groundwater resources that are within the watershed. If there are access or mobility considerations during flood events that you would like to share with us, we'd appreciate that. Also, any impacts to agricultural production, residential property damage or other property damage, loss of income, subsidence, and damaged infrastructure. So obviously, we've collected a lot of information during the initial portion of the scoping period. We'd like to get additional feedback from you so we can further expand our understanding of the needs within the watershed. If there are key community or natural resources that you're aware of, perhaps tribal lands, cultural resources, recreational resources, scenic vistas, protected habitat or habitat that you believe should be protected, we're very interested in that as well. Any other goals that you would recommend we consider, and also any questions or feedback you have. All this is very powerful for us making the best recommendations and sharing those recommendations to you at a later stage when the draft EA is released. And next up, Linda's going to provide us some additional information about the project and how you can be involved.
Great, thank you, Laura. We mentioned before, as part of this project and plan, that we will be looking at mitigation solutions. And these will be solutions to solve problems that are identified by the project team as well as reported by any of you out there. We are still early in the process and we have not come up with specific mitigation solutions at this time. However, we do know that we will be considering items such as retention basins to hold water, potentially groundwater recharge in conjunction with these retention basins, or further channelization of washes. We'd also like to note that multiple projects are possible. These might be a mixture of local and regional solutions, and the location of these projects may vary. We will look at these alternatives and compare them for their ability to solve the problems that have been identified, their impact on the natural and built environment, regulatory requirements, other planned projects in the vicinity, and also the costs and benefits of each project. The most viable alternatives will be carried forward for further study. On this slide, we'd like to talk about our process and schedule, and we do ask for your patience as we work through this, as it is an extended process. On the screen, you'll see our general project schedule, where our watershed plan and environmental assessment project that we're in right now will take about 2 years. We also expect after this to apply for funding and design, which we expect to take about another 2 years. And depending on each of the projects that happen, construction might take a year or more. So again, we'd like to reiterate that this is a long-term process. We've mentioned before the various ways for you to submit comments, feedback, questions, photos online. We have our online form on the screen, the email address to Chris Wanamaker, as well as his mailing address. And as I mentioned before, comments submitted until January 12th will be used in the development of the plan and mitigation alternatives. And the public will have another opportunity to review the draft plan and provide additional input before this is finalized. Thanks for your attention and participation tonight. We do have a few questions that have shown up in our question box. Our format for this is that we will read the questions out and provide answers for you. So the first question we have here was asking if Greene wash is a different region from the previous Vehicle and Smith wash that were discussed a few months ago. The answer to this is yes, it is a different watershed. This is located to the south-ish from those other two watersheds. The next question I'll read, and Chris, if you would be so willing to provide an answer to the group for this one. The question is that during Chris Wanamaker's presentation, he identified the property located at the southeast corner of Battaglia and Hennis as an example of a watershed concern. Can you please advise what the concern is in this specific area? Also, what would be the potential proposed mitigation measures and how would they impact properties in those areas?
Hey, yep, this is Chris. So in my presentation, I referenced that location as an example of a project that Pinal County has invested in. We constructed a regional detention basin at that location. So there's no specific concerns at this point other than what we're trying to do with our current project effort, which is to construct channels to collect, convey, and the runoff to this location. So these are local solutions that we're already working on right now. So that was simply an example of what we've done in Arizona City. But we know, as I mentioned, that to really fully address the flooding issues in Arizona City, we're going to have to look both at local solutions and regional solutions, which this plan will look at those. Let's see here. Also, so yeah, I think that should cover it.
Yeah, Chris, I was hoping you could take the next question as well, which is, will this widen FEMA flood zones in our area?
Sure, yep, that's a good question. So no, this project, this study, this watershed plan does not include floodplain delineation. There's no intent to revise the FEMA floodplains or change any of that with this project. It's not part of the scope of work.
Okay, great. It looks like our final question we've received so far this evening is, what is the source of the observed floodwaters? You mentioned seasonal sources and local cloudburst events. Can you elaborate a bit? And Chris, I can take this to start with, and then you can answer any questions after that. Great. So the source of the floodwaters is rain that falls within the watershed, but also we have a source of water coming from the south, coming in from the watershed, draining very far to the south. So Chris mentioned the project, the Greene Canal project that happened in the early 1900s. There is some water diverted from the Santa Cruz River that does travel through this watershed as well. Chris, anything you wanted to add on that? Yeah,
sure. So the Santa Cruz River is a river that starts in Arizona, flows south into Mexico, makes a U-turn, it comes back through Santa Cruz County, Pima County, and then eventually into Pinal County. That has a more than 8,000 square mile watershed. And so that is also a source of runoff coming into this watershed that needs to be considered. That's in addition, of course, to the rainfall landing within the watershed itself.
Great. Thank you. We got another question that just came in. Would the mitigation efforts in the Santa Cruz watershed affect the Greene watershed? So I guess I can start with this question, Chris. Right now, I'm unaware of the Santa Cruz watershed and any mitigation efforts happening there, but in general, anything that's done in the upper watershed would also help the Greene watershed as well.
Right, that's correct, and I'll go ahead and add to that you know, we are working on 4 different watershed plans right now. 2 were referenced earlier by another question, the Smith Wash and Vico Wash. We also have the Guild Wash watershed plan, and the commonality between these 4 plans is they are all situated around the Santa Cruz River, so they're either tributaries or branches of the Santa Cruz River. So anything that happens, especially in the upper watershed, which the Guild Wash watershed is upstream, any project that is proposed in those watersheds could have a positive benefit by means of reduction of flood flows to these lower watersheds, including Greene Wash.
Great, thank you. Well, I don't see any more questions coming in this evening. As I mentioned before, we will repeat this presentation at 6 p.m., followed by another round of questions. You are welcome to stay for that process or sign out, and we'll stay on the line here. If you think of any questions, please feel free to type them in the question box. And it looks like we do have one more that came in, and it says, will you work on all 4 watersheds? If I'm understanding the question correctly, Pinal County and NRCS are on all 4 of these watersheds?
Yeah, I think that's what he's asking. So we've got the Smith, the Vico, the Greene, and the Guild Wash. These are 4 watershed plans that we are working on right now with the NRCS. 2 are funded directly by Pinal County, and 2 are partially funded by the NRCS and Pinal County. And we have different consultants helping us, different project teams for each watershed.
Great, thank you, Chris. Just a comment more than a question. I like the idea of retention ponds and redistribution channels. If the redistribution channels can be covered, it would reduce evaporative loss. Thank you for that comment. Another question is, how will this impact the current plan for I-11, which is currently planned to be placed within the Greene watershed? That's an excellent question. We do have the I-11 planning corridor within our maps. So that is something that we are going to consider, both from impacts that it might cause as well as opportunities for us to look at that corridor for potential mitigation solutions.
Right, and I'm going to add to that. So, as this plan moves forward, we're going to have to coordinate with the team that's working on the Interstate 11, because as Linda mentioned earlier in the presentation, this is a long-term project, and depending on timing of when I-11 comes in and when our projects come in, there may be opportunities to collaborate, because with the I-11 improvements, they're going to have to put in infrastructure to deal with drainage and flooding, and we may be able to do stuff at the same time. Typically with freeways, they need dirt to raise up the freeways. Typically with flood projects, we need to get rid of dirt. So it might be mutually beneficial if we can work that out. But it's definitely something we're going to have to coordinate with that team on.
Great, thank you. Okay, well, no more questions have popped up for now. We'll go ahead and turn off our cameras and mute our microphones. However, if questions do come up, we'd be happy to answer them, and we will start the presentation again at 6 p.m. We really appreciate all of your participation and great questions in this process. Next question, are there any maps available that show the I-11 freeway Yes, there are. I found these maps by doing an internet browser search and by typing in Interstate 11 Planning Corridor. So that's one way. And then we can also get a link to that public website for the I-11 freeway out there to everyone.
Yeah, I just looked that up. It's i11study.com. So i11study.com. So
Thank you, Chris. I did put that website in the chat box.
thank you.
Thank you to everyone who's remaining on the line, and for any new people that may have joined. On the screen, we're showing the schedule for this presentation. Right now, we have answered all the questions that have come in and are remaining on the line should any more come in, and then we'll restart our presentation at 6. Thanks. Well, great, thank you. We did have another question come in, and the question is, has the Greene Reservoir Flood District been disbanded as we have been taxed inappropriately over the years, and it accounted for doubling our property taxes in the last several years in the South Harmon Road area east of Sunland Gin? Chris, I don't know if you have any information on that.
Yeah, so the Greene Reservoir Flood Control District does still exist. They still have a board, and we actually talk to them occasionally. In fact, in the presentation, I mentioned the Sunland Gin Road improvements that we're working on with Fema, and that was a project that we had several meetings with the Greene Reservoir Flood Control District to coordinate on. And my last conversation with them, they were talking about doing maintenance within a portion of the channels that they own, basically just clearing out vegetation, and that was it. So yeah, they still exist. We talk to them occasionally, and they will be a stakeholder, at least notification wise, on this study, and will have input, since it's possible that whatever we propose may interact with or complement some of the infrastructure that they own.
Great, thank you, Chris. Feel free for any of you on the presentation right now, if you do have questions, do feel free to type them in the question box, and we'll continue to remain here on the line to answer them until we start our presentation again at 6.